Shady's Place, May 27, 1936. I swung around in the dimming light. A man stood holding a pitchfork as tall as he was, and only slightly thinner. Everything about the man was thin. His clothes, his hair, even his scruffy whiskers were sparse on his face. "Is that yours?" he asked. At first I thought he meant the pitchfork, and then I saw a compass dangling from his fingers. I checked my satchel in a panic. The outside pocket had torn open when I'd fallen. "I'm Shady Howard. You must be Gideon's girl." I let out the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. He handed me the gold compass. I hung it around my neck and tucked it into my shirt. "When you didn't get off the train, I thought you'd be making your own way into town." He said it like he had jumped from a train a time or two himself. With his worn plaid shirt and brown pants that had been stitched and patched, he looked the part too. "Are you related to Pastor Howard, the preacher at First Baptist Church?" "There's folks that call me Pastor Howard, but you can call me Shady." I kept my distance, not knowing exactly what he meant. "Do they call you that because you are the preacher at First Baptist Church?" "Well, that's an interesting story." He started walking using his pitchfork as a walking stick. "You see, I'm what's called an interim pastor, meaning the old one left, and I'm just filling in till they can get a new one." How long you been filling in?" I asked, thinking maybe he hadn't had time to order his preacher clothes yet, or shave. 14 years. "Oh," I put on some manners. "So you weren't in the church business when my daddy was here?" "No, I wasn't." "Well, I'm Aveline. I'm 12 years old and a hard worker," I said, like 100 other times in as many different towns. "So I guess you got the letter my daddy sent telling y'all I was coming?" Mind you, I don't really say y'all, but it's usually best to try and sound a bit like the folks whose town you're moving into. Never being in Kansas before, I wouldn't know for sure, but I imagine they'd say things like y'all and up the road a piece and weather's coming on. "Are you hungry?" Shady asked. "My place is just up the road a piece." There it was. Funny how people who know exactly where they are can talk about directions. I guess those who don't just keep moving straight ahead. You don't need much direction for that. "No, sir. I'd only had a hard-boiled egg on the train, but I was here under his hospitality, and it didn't feel right asking for food so soon." "We'll just head into town then, as I need to pick up a letter." There would still be daylight enough to take a good look around the town. As we began to walk, Gideon's stories came back to me in flashes, like views between the trees from a window train. Sissy, sit. People bustling in and out of colorful storefronts with bright awnings over the windows. Unusual sounding names painted on the doors. Mantonopoulos Meat, Santonio's Bakery, Ackerson's Feed and Seed. Walking in step with Shady, I tried to conjure up something smooth and sweet from those stories, but looking around, all I could muster up was dry and stale. Up and down Main Street, the stores were dingy, gray. Every third one was boarded up. The only awnings left were torn and saggy. There wasn't an ounce of bustling to be had, just a few tired souls holding up a doorway here and there. But then, hard times are a penny for plenty. They call it a depression, but I'd say it's a downright rut, and the whole country's in it. There was a big gingerbread-like house sorely lacking for paint. A proper-looking lady sat quietly in a rocking chair on the porch, not having the life in her to rock. The barber, leaning up against his shop door, stared as I passed. A lady in the grocery store fanned herself as a little dog yapped through the screen door. And from some of the glares I got walking up the broad sidewalk, I figured those folks would rather suffer through hard times on their own than have a stranger come in to witness their misery. We didn't slow down at the post office. "I thought we were picking up the mail." "Not mail, a letter from Hattie Mae at the newspaper." "Hattie Mae Harper? Huckleberry Queen of 1917? Well, she's Hattie Mae Mack now, but that's her. At least there was something familiar in this town. I wondered if Hattie Mae had kept up her news auxiliary. The Manifest Herald newspaper office was about centered on Main Street, and we walked into a holy mess. Newspapers were stacked 2 and 3 feet tall. A typewriter sat on a clutched desk, its key splayed open with some scattered on the desk like it tried to spell explosion, and the explosion happened. "Shady, that you?" a woman's voice hollered from back. "I'm just getting ready to close up. Thanks so much for coming by to pick up." A large woman came out from the back room, her hair in a frazzled bun. She caught sight of me and her hands went to her face. "Well, aren't you a darling? You must be Abilene." "Yes, ma'am." "My, but you do look like your daddy." She pressed me to her warm bosom, and I felt her catch her breath. When I looked up at her again, her eyes were wet. "Would you like a soda pop? Of course you would. You go right on back and get yourself a nice cold bottle. We've got Coca-Cola and Orange Crush. Take your pick. And there's a couple of sandwiches in there. One's cheese and one's meatloaf. You help yourself now, and don't tell me you're not hungry." "Okay," I said. I started to make my way through the maze of newspapers. Those sandwiches sounded good. "You'll have to excuse the mess. Uncle Henry insists on saving all those old newspapers, but my husband Fred is finally going to build a storage shed out back, so I'm trying to get them organized." "I've had your very first news auxiliary my whole life," I blurted out. "Oh, my heavens, how'd you get a hold of that piece of antiquity?" She laughed and her body jiggled. "Have you been writing that column all this time?" "You mean all the who's, what's, why's, when's, and where's? Oh, yes, I suppose I have. And thanks to the Depression, I've also been promoted to copy editor, typesetter, and office maker extraordinaire." She laughed. "Say, if you find yourself with any spare time, you come see me and help as much as you like. As you can see, there are plenty of old newspapers that need to get put in order. If you like reading ancient history, you might find it kind of interesting." I nodded, thinking that I would find it interesting. "Now go get your pop and sandwich, Sweet Pea, and help yourself to whatever newspapers you want. Uncle Henry won't mind giving them away to someone who actually wants to read them, and that'll be all the fewer I'll need to sort through later." I found the soda pop chest easy enough and picked out Orange Crush and the meatloaf sandwich. There was a built-in opener right on the side of the chest. Handy and Hattie Mae were talking about how hot it had been and how there wasn't even a hint of rain. I gobbled down half the sandwich and let my hand run over a stack of newspapers, at one after another. I felt like I was floating in a cloud that was passing from one year to another in no particular order. 1929, stock market crashes. 1927, Babe Ruth hits 60 home runs in one season. 1927, Charles Lindbergh flies solo across Atlantic in 33.5 hours. Then a particular year caught my eye, 1917. Bone Dry Bill makes alcohol illegal in Kansas. That was the same year as Hattie Mae's first news auxiliary. That was when Gideon had been in Manifest. My heart picked up speed. I didn't really expect to find Gideon's name in the headlines, or anywhere else in the paper for that matter, but I might come to know this town a little better through the articles and stories. This town where he had spent time as a boy. This town where he had chosen to send me. "You find yourself a soda pop, Sweet Pea?" Hattie Mae called. "Do I need to come and rescue you from that bottomless pit of newspapers?" "Coming," I called. "You sure it's okay if I take a couple of papers? Something to read while I'm here?" "Go right ahead." I thumbed through a stack of papers and chose the only 2 I'd found from 1917, July 16th and October 11th. I tucked the papers into my satchel and went back into the front room. Hattie Mae was talking in a hushed voice to Shady. Her face looked a little drawn and worried as she whispered, "Shady, she needs to know." But she perked up when she saw me. "Just listen to me yammering on. You've had a long day, Sweet Pea, and you need to get refreshed for that last day of school tomorrow." That must have been what I needed to know. School, I sputtered, on my last swallow of soda orange. But it's summertime. I looked pleadingly at Shady. Don't folks around here have to be bringing in the sheaves or something? He gave me an apologetic look, as if he thought the same. We just figured you might like to meet some of the kids before they scatter to the four winds for the summer, Hattie Mae said. I wondered who we was and how many of them I was up against. But my daddy will be coming to get me before school starts up again, I said. Then I saw Hattie Mae and Shady glance at each other, kind of uneasy. They exchanged a look that made me feel a little wobbly and off balance, like I was standing in a train that took an unexpected curve. But I was probably just tired from my travel. Hattie Mae put her arm around me. Now don't you worry, you'll be just fine. As she squeezed me tight, the phone rang. That'll be Fred. His sciatica is acting up, and he's home with the boys. He doesn't feel good, and you know how men are when they don't feel good. The world comes to a standstill. Here's the letter that needs fixing. She handed Shady a key from the typewriter. The R won't type at all, and the L keeps getting stuck. You can take the whole thing if you want. I've got tomorrow's column close to done, so I won't be needing it for the time being. The phone kept ringing. I've got to get that. Shady? It's good to meet you, Abilene. You let me know if you need anything. You hear? Yes, ma'am. She picked up the phone. Hello? Yes, I'm coming. Oh, for heaven's sakes, just leave it there. I'll clean it up when I get home. Shady picked up the discombobulated typewriter, and we got while the getting was good. By then it was dark, and Shady led the way down an alley off Main Street. We headed back toward the tracks and ended up in a weathered establishment that appeared to be a safe distance from the respectable part of town. I've lived in a lot of places. Barns, abandoned rail cars, even Hoovervilles, the shack towns for folks with no money, named for the president before the one we got now, who didn't seem to know that the country was in hard times. So I was prepared for anything, except Shady's place. A cowbell clanged above the door as we went in. Pastor Howard lit a kerosene lamp and set it on a long bar top. There was a mirror behind it, and a sawhorse in front with some wood clamped into a vise, and an abundance of sawdust all over the floor. To top it off, there was what looked to be pews shoved up against the wall, and the two windows had honest-to-goodness stained glass. Well, this is it, Shady announced, as if that explained everything. I looked around, not wanting to ask. It was like a jigsaw puzzle I had to piece together by myself. Shady's place appeared to be one part saloon, one part carpenter shop, and, could it be, one part church? I must have been staring at the windows because Shady said, the First Baptist Church burned down some years back. The windows in a couple of pews were salvaged. They've been kept here temporarily until a Second Baptist Church is built. That why the pastor left, I asked. Yup, Shady answered. I guess his nerves were about shot by then. He tried to gather up some papers and scraps of wood, as if there were traces of his mismatched life that he hadn't wanted me to see. I looked at the floor. Footprints went every which way, probably from years of drinkers and churchgoers. I felt an ache in my heart that rose like a lump in my throat as to catch myself from searching for a less busy part of the room, a small, still place where there might still be one or two of my daddy's footprints left.